Welcome to Short and to the Point, a podcast from the Comeback in Awful Announcing. Here's your host, Jessica Kleinschmidt.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Short and to the Point on the Comeback in Awful Announcing. Jess Kleinschmidt here. Thanks for tuning in to another episode. This one was extra fun. I always get a little extra excited. I know I'm saying extra a lot because I'm extra, but I get really excited for these interviews because when my good friends get to join the show, there's always more passion and love that goes into them. So Amy Lawrence of CBS Sports Radio joins us today. And I totally forgot how we met until we taped this episode. It was 2019. I had just covered my first playoff game in person. It was the wild card series between the Rays and the A's. Mind you, this was back in the olden days. It wasn't that long ago. It was back before there were more than one wild card game. It was that one and out, like gripping onto everything in your path, edge of your seat type of game. And I loved it. And I was able to witness that in person. And she DM'd me and said, would you come on CBS Sports Radio to talk about the show? So I got to cover my first playoff game, go on a national radio show. And then I was introduced to one of my good friends who would eventually turn into my mentor. And I thought that was important too, to talk about, because when I first started in this industry, I didn't have any women that I could look up to. And now I can't imagine starting my day without the women in my life. I have her. I have my two best friends in Melanie Newman and Danny Wexelman. They, of course, have been on the show. We have a group chat that gives me life, and I'm so thankful for them. And without them, I would not be here, and I'm very appreciative. So we talk about that, just the state of how sports radio has changed over the years. We, of course, talk about the digital element, which is very important to my career. But it's interesting to see how that was never a thing when she first started, and now it's taking over the space, and not just radio, but the entire sports media world. And I thought it was very important that she let us know that there's so many spaces for women to fill, not just on the sidelines or in front of a microphone, but those front office positions, PR, everything involved. Women have a spot, a space in sports. And I think that's so important. So without further ado, here's my chat with Amy Lawrence. Amy, welcome to Short and to the Point. I'm so glad that you're here for a multitude of reasons, but you're finally here. Thanks for stopping by.
Anything for you. And you know, I mean that, of course, anything for you. Even getting on screen and doing my hair and putting on a relatively clean shirt on a Friday afternoon, only for you, Jess.
I know. And I genuinely believe that. And it's so great to have you here for, like I said, a multitude of reasons. And we'll get into like our relationship because it's so important to my life. But you know, your background in sports radio is so fascinating because you've seen so many different avenues and different trends of it after 25 years in the space. So when I ask you, you know, what's the differences from the time you started until now, what comes to mind as far as the sports radio space is concerned?
Well, gosh, do you want me to do top three, top five?
Let's do top three. I don't know if we have time for all of it, but yes, we'll do top three.
Well, the biggest change and the most significant seismic shift has been social media and the digital takeover. And I'm teaching a class at Syracuse this semester where I talk to my students about building a radio show using the cognitive element, the creative element, trying to get your show to stand out in what is an extremely crowded market. And to do that, very often, what you have to do is enhance your product with the digital side of things. Mm-hmm. So many people listen to radio on demand. Now, at its basic level, it's still radio. It is still a broadcast that goes over an audio medium, but you have to be able to employ the digital element. Not that you want to go overboard and sell your soul to the digital devil, if that makes sense. You're not gauging your entire audience or your participation or the health and the entertaining value of your show based on social media, because that's a really bad idea. But you do have to use the digital space. And these days, as you know, Jess, most news breaks on Twitter or breaks on another form of digital social media, but then also to have a podcast. And I think that's something that, as much as I don't love social media, I'll be honest, the second I'm done with this gig, I'm out. Like, as in, delete the accounts, get out. What I do love about the digital space is that you can include people who aren't listening to the show live. And there are a lot of people who are, which is awesome. And they make an appointment listening. But to have that digital component, that digital quality. Also, it makes editing so much easier. I go back to the very end stages of when you were actually splicing tape with a little razor blade. Who knows why they ever gave us razor blades at Syracuse, but that's what they did. And so we would be in the editing bays and we would have razor blades and we'd be literally splicing tape.
Wow.
It's not fun. I don't recommend it. Although right now that might be kind of like a OG.
Yeah.
So to be able to edit and to be able to flip interviews and to be able to put together musical montages or obviously play-by-play, these days you don't have to wait for someone to send you an analog copy. You can access pretty much anything from the A's broadcast, from your broadcast within, a couple of seconds by finding it on digital. And so it's an expanded platform, of course. It comes with its own pitfalls and its own challenges, but it is something new that if you know how to harness that digital element, you can use it to your advantage. So that's one thing. I would say too, in terms of being a female in this business, there are more of us everywhere, which I love. Now, sports radio itself at its truest form is still more of a vast wasteland when it comes to females. And I understand that if you're really good at what you do, there are spaces for women to be on camera. There are sideline reporter gigs out the wazoo, much more now on the YouTube. And as we talked about the digital space, there's more of those on-camera opportunities. But straight sports radio, there still aren't very many of us who just do sports radio. And as much as I appreciate that today's athletes are conditioned to accept everyone in the locker room or the clubhouse for baseball, as much as they know better than to make any type of a comment or any type of an inappropriate remark. I mean, that happened a lot when I was first starting in the business. I remember covering the Red Sox in spring training in 2004, year that they ended the curse. But it was not a happy place because Nomar Garciaparra hated media. He didn't want females in the clubhouse, even at spring training. Oh, it was gross. And I won't name any more names. Actually, I don't even generally use Nomar, but he was so cranky. Everyone knew he was cranky that season. Ended up that the Red Sox traded him because he was so cranky and so cantankerous. But there were others who would do things like drop trowel right in front of you, not because they were getting change, but just because they wanted to let you know that you didn't belong there. And so that has changed now. Today's athletes, they do not do those types of things on a regular basis. And whether it's because they've been raised right by their mamas, whether it's because they know better, you'll get called out on social media, you go viral for all the wrong reasons. They know better, and I appreciate that because it's not quite the same overt discrimination or sexism that we used to have. I mean, there's still plenty of the inherent kind of embedded sexism that people don't even think about. Like, here's a great example. I actually shared this with my husband not that long ago, and he didn't get it, but he's from Texas. Do you know when people are angry at the Cowboys and they think the Cowboys suck, they call them girls?
Yeah.
Right. So that's the type
I did
of
know
thing.
that actually. Yeah.
Right. And it just comes so naturally and it's supposed to be funny. But when you really think about it, it's not that funny at all. When, you hear the analogy, and actually it's happened in baseball too, right? I think Joe Madden used it a few years ago about guys putting on skirts. Do they want us to put on skirts out there and be soft? They're changing our game. They're changing the toughness of it. So if you were soft as a male athlete, you become a female or you put on a skirt. That's the kind of stuff we'll constantly be fighting. And then it's really funny because this class I teach at Syracuse, there is one female. I'm thankful for her. She doesn't want to do radio, but she wants to be on camera. And what you'll hear from some of the guys is, just this general idea that if you don't know as much as the female does about sports, then there must be something wrong with you, which is funny. Right. I mean, I shouldn't have a national radio job if I don't know more than the average Joe or June about sports. So there are more of us in radio and there are more of us in media. And it's amazing to see and to connect with smart, savvy, clever survivors as females in our business, because you do have to go through a little extra something to get to the point where you are accepted. Not that that matters, right? It took me a long time, Jess, and I know I've said this to you. I say this to every young woman that I mentor. Don't waste your time trying to be like the guys. That was the advice that I got, poor advice, when I first started in this business, because there were no female bosses. There were no females who were giving me advice. And honestly, I don't have any now. I mean, I'll reach out to some, but at this point, I'm the one who's giving the advice. And I try to say to young women, don't waste your time trying to be something that you're not, because you eventually are exhausted and you run out of energy and it's fake. Listeners or viewers can see right through it. So how about just be who you are, because there's only one of you. And I love the fact that there is a unique audience for for female hosts or female anchors or female, insiders, any of that type of thing, because there are more and more women who either wish they could have done the same thing when they were younger and there just wasn't that space, or they maybe don't care a ton about sports. They just love the fact that someone on TV and radio sounds like them and looks like them. But then you've got the other, which, and I hear from women in this arena all the time, who just are so thrilled that it's normal, quote unquote, for a woman to talk about sports now. It's normal for a woman to engage in conversation and to start dropping stats and to talk about the game she went to. It's more normal for a woman to have sports as her number one hobby. So there are changes in the space, but it's still a slow burn. I don't know that we're there yet. I'm not even sure what the destination is, Jess, only that there's not the same resistance.
I was going to ask that too, because it's always interesting, like, as far as the destination goes, I don't think that there's a finish line for women in sports, at least in the near future.
But I do want to be what I didn't have to young people. And this is not just females, it's also males. People ask me all the time, who were your role models? Who were the people that you modeled your show after? And this is not political. It has nothing to do with his politics, but Rush Limbaugh, he was everywhere when I was growing up. And so he was brilliant at the radio craft, right? Regardless of whether you agreed with him, you listened to him. Either you hated him and you couldn't wait to hear what inane, like furious thing that he said so that you could hate him for another week or whatever, or it was the opposite, where you thought, whoa, okay, yeah, I'm on board with that. He was brilliant at the radio craft. And so I actually listened to people who weren't even in sports because I was more drawn to kind of that cerebral news radio. And I did start my career in news, which was so valuable for the first 5+ years that I was in the business. So that's another big change. The iceberg is melting. We'll call it global warming in sports radio, in sports. But I don't know what the destination is. Maybe at some point not that we're seeing the same, because again, I don't need to be like a guy. I went through that stage of my career. I just want to be Amy, but that it's not a big deal for a woman to be talking about sports, or you don't get this thing about, what do you know? You didn't play football.
Well, and that's what's interesting, because you said it, you're like, you wouldn't have had a national sports show if you didn't know more than the average Joe. Right. And it's almost like you're not allowed to have that mentality because you are female. It's almost like you're not allowed to have, like, it's so weird to me, because yes, I didn't play baseball and softball as much as I would have liked because the opportunities were not presented.
Right.
That's just black and white. That is what it is. I would have loved to continue my career, but in baseball, but I share a press box with guys that I played baseball with longer than they ever did. So that's a lie, but B, if the opportunities aren't there, of course you're going to have a better opportunity to play professional sports in the sports that I'm covering because they were there. But it's so interesting that you're supposed to have the mentality of, well, you're not allowed to know more about sports than me, literally because of your gender. It blows my mind.
Right. And again, people wouldn't pinpoint it and say, oh, yes, I actually believe that. But you'll hear it in speech, right?
Yeah.
You'll hear it in conversation. My first 3 years at ESPN Radio, they wouldn't allow me to talk football. No one ever said to me, hey, we don't think you have the credibility. No one ever said to me it's because of your gender, because that would be a no-no.
Yeah.
But it took 3 years before they let me host any type of a show that was specific and that focused on football. And to me, that's kind of that overt sexism that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so I love that there's just more and more voices, and the voices sound different. And I'm determined to leave broadcasting. I mean, they're going to have to drag me out on a stretcher.
Yeah.
I'm determined to leave broadcasting better for females and for young men, not just for women.
Yeah.
But to help prepare them, because I really didn't have that when I was younger. I mean, I'd say this too, Jess. I went to Syracuse going back. As a grad student, I was there, and I had a female research professor, but I did not have any females who taught in the industry, in the business. Now, the way Syracuse does it, one of the reasons they're able to maintain their lofty status as one of the best broadcast schools in the country is because you have to be in the business to be a professor of whatever it is that you're teaching. So I'm an adjunct professor and I teach radio, but I have to be working in radio because that gives some extra credibility. And my students have said to me, we don't have any other female professors in Newhouse, which is the school specifically for broadcast journalism. So it's still, there's lots of doors to push open. There's lots of walls to kick down. There's lots of ceilings to crack, but it's fun to do it. I definitely think it's a better space and I don't want to say easier because this business is not easy, but it's a more inviting space for women now. And I hope that there are more young women who are interested in the art of radio, in the theater of the mind, because I do think there are more opportunities.
I agree.
And also, program directors too. We need program directors.
Okay.
We need producers who are women. We need general managers who are women. The more that happens, the more that the doors will open up. Sorry to cut you off.
No, that's totally fine. I think that I'm glad you said that, because there are so many different things we could do. I remember growing up, it was like only women could do sidelines, and that was it. And that was still a rarity. And so I think it's cool to know that there are so many things that women can do in that space. And first and foremost, I did sell my soul to the digital devil, and I'm happy to say that. It introduced me to you, and it introduced me to so many other people. But so tell me a little bit about Syracuse and your teaching, because that's a new avenue that you've encroached on. What's that been like?
Oh, it's been a huge challenge, because I can talk until I'm blue in the face and talk for hours a night with no one actually staring at me. But when you've got a bunch of teenagers, I have some teenagers who are sophomores, and then seniors and grad students who are looking at me. It's like when I go and I do a keynote speech of some sort, it scares me so much to be standing in a room where people are looking at me, even though on any given night, there are hundreds of thousands of people listening, and it could be athletes coming home from a road trip. It's coaches, it's other broadcasters. It just doesn't ever shake me, because I'm in my safe space, my comfort zone, if you will. I've got everything the way I need it. I'm used to that. But to get out in front of students, and I have a couple of nieces who are recently graduated from college. And so I asked them, what do you need from a producer? What is it that makes a class worth taking? And also asked, I have a friend, a young woman that I mentor, who just graduated from CUSE about 4 years ago. And I asked her the same thing, like, how do I make this a class that people will want to come back to? Mm-hmm. And so two things. It really is important to me to teach the art of a radio, because when I was at CUSE, the philosophy, and I think it's still this way, if you know TV, you know radio. And that is not the case. I mean, because you do podcasts, you do radio, but you also are on camera. It's a completely different formula. It's a completely different type of broadcast. And it's not the same personal element that people get from radio a lot of times. And so I wanted a class that would speak to and help students craft their own radio style. Because if you're like me and you're a radio junkie, I have zero desire to be on camera. Only if you can craft your own style, well, the whole idea is that you'll stand out in what is a very crowded market, where there are 8,932,000 podcasts out there. Mm-hmm. And so the whole idea is, how do you build a show that is memorable and that is worth listening to, that people will continue coming back to? How do you stand out in a crowded field? And it's such different principles than being on camera. And so the whole idea is for them to and it's 4 classes until I'm done doing the overnight shift that I'm on. It's really hard to get up to campus and to be gone and do the drive and stuff more than the 4 weeks in a row that I'm doing it. So right now it's a 1-credit class, but I originally designed it to be a 3-credit over 11 weeks. Now we're kind of pushing it together, and they have assignments that are very practical, like prepare for an interview. Any sports figure that you would like to talk to, how do you prepare for that interview? We talk about basic principles of research and also creativity. How do you take your voice, which it's not because you are good or bad at it, but just one voice is monotonous. How do you dress it up and add creative elements so that it becomes appointment listening, or so that, again, it stands out? Now, radio has this unique quality, maybe TV too, because people do fall asleep with the TV on, right? But radio can be background noise, or a podcast and be background noise. How do you dress up your broadcast, whatever it happens to be, in a way that it arrests people, and it's a full sensory theater of the mind? And I did this past weekend. My husband and I, we watched the new Mission Impossible movie, and it's crazy. It's nonstop, right? I played the trailer in class, and I didn't let them watch it. They could only hear it. And I asked them about the full body experience of this trailer that was created, not just those calm, kind of sinister moments, but, Tom Cruise's voice, obviously, his crazy stunts. You can hear the motorcycle in the background as he goes up that rise and leaps off, one of the nuttier stunts that we've ever seen in cinema history. But also, embedded is the theme, right? The MI theme. So they couldn't see it, but they could figure it out. And I asked them, what do you hear? Now, You've got people who make millions of dollars to put those trailers together. I'm not asking you to do that on your social media, but can you understand the idea of theater of the mind that is arresting for your senses? So that's kind of the idea, is it's building a radio show from the ground up and recognizing it is not, Jess, it is not walking into a studio or plugging in a microphone and just talking for 4 hours. If you do that, A, you won't last, and B, nobody's going to want to listen to you anyway.
And when you say that, does it shock people? Because when people approach me and they're like, I want to do what you're doing, and they think you just walk into a studio, plug in a microphone, and talk, can you immediately like pinpoint those people and say they're really shocked about the stuff that goes into this?
Well, yes, even my students are, right?
Yeah.
Guys sports and think they want to be sports radio hosts, but absolutely. People don't realize how much prep goes into the audio and the music and the production. And I wish we could do more, but in this tightening space, and I know we're going to talk about it, that is the media industry, you're more and more crunched. There are fewer people doing more of the work. So I used to have 4 people on the show. Now it's just the 2 of us. And so it's been hard. I've had to let go of some of the elements, the imaging that I would like to do, the production, and focus on what I think are the creative elements that work best for us in our space. But yeah, I mean, when you're covering athletes, they make it look easy if they're really good at it.
Yeah.
Remember Ken Griffey Jr.'s swing?
Yeah.
It's just this easy swing. It looked like he sauntered up to the plate and took a swing and boom, the ball was gone.
Yeah.
And same thing with golfers. The idea behind golfing and golfing well is that you're not trying to kill the ball. You're doing the exact opposite, where you're keeping all your muscles in check. So if I can make it sound like I showed up 5 minutes before the show started, which has only happened once when I slept through my alarm. And if I can make it sound like all I'm doing is just having a conversation with people, well, then I'm doing the job, because radio is also that unique element where it's personal, and I've said this to my students, one of the hardest things for me was to learn how to talk to people, not at people. And it's tough to do initially when you can't see people and you don't know who you're talking to. So it was a tougher challenge, especially since I started in news and not the talk space where I was delivering, information and I was on a script. I'm so much better off a script, and it becomes much more free flowing. So if radio is this way to connect with people, it's the way to become a companion. It's a way to remind people they're not alone. I mean, ever since the pandemic, that's become one of the goals of my show. Well, if that's the case, then you want it to sound like you just kind of showed up and sat down and we're just shooting the BS here and we're talking about the latest game or the latest story. It's not an easy thing to do. It takes years of practice, of course, but it's okay with me when people say, you only work 4 hours a night. Right. That's it. Just 4 hours a night. In fact, I have the cushiest job in America.
Yeah. One of my closest friends recently thought I just showed up right before first pitch and stayed for the game and left. And I was like, I mean, actually, I don't wish because I don't like traffic and I don't like when like people are there. So I love that I can do that. But so it's kind of interesting from that dynamic. And in their defense, they're only seeing those 4 hours where the game's going on, or in your case, the show's going on. But, and the thing that's interesting is you talk about standing out, and it's such an interesting approach because you want to stand out. Yes. But you also know that you want to get all the listeners, the downloads, what have you, but you're not going to appease everybody. Right. And it's going to be, and this isn't just like, oh, I'm not used to hearing a woman's voice on air. You're not going to make everybody happy. So how do you stay true in your authenticity and stand out? But then you have people saying, I don't like when you say these things, things. You could easily go back down the rabbit hole and say, oh, I should have said this, but you have to stay true to who you are, especially as a woman. That's hard.
It is. And women are judged by a tougher standard. If I make a mistake, instantly it's because I suck, not necessarily because I just made a mistake. So there are a couple of things. Number one, the business is humbling. It's impossible to be perfect all the time. And I'm a perfectionist, so that does not appeal to my sensibilities. But once I realized that, and I kind of realized this by listening to other people, if Mike Breen calling an NBA game makes a big mistake, so he fixes it, he apologizes, and they move on. When the game is over, is that what I'm really thinking about? I guess it's a colossal mistake or something that would stand out in our culture. most part, people make mistakes, right? They say the wrong word. I'm notorious for calling people by the wrong first names. There's so many names in my head, right? So for the first 3 years of George Kittle's career, I was calling him Greg Kittle. And I didn't even notice. It was coming out of my mouth, right? And so people make mistakes. No one's perfect. And I suppose it can be somewhat endearing. I don't love to make mistakes, but I just have to own them. So that's one thing. Stay humble and recognize there's no such thing as perfect. I think another part of that too is that if you are a host who has prepared, whether it's the material that you know you're going to use, or maybe it's just other material that you glean from watching a game. You're probably not going to use all your material. If you are prepared, you can weather any hit, you can weather any punch, you can weather any storm. And let's be fair, there are days when hosts themselves are going through a lot of crap behind the scenes. It's just like an athlete, right? They're real humans. They're people who mess up and they sometimes don't perform at the highest level. And maybe ask them, well, I've got a family member who's dealing with something, or I don't feel well today, like Tyrese Maxey a couple games ago for the Sixers. So just recognizing that human element actually is I think it's a valuable tool. It's not something to shy away from.
Yeah.
You make a mistake, you own it. You then are humble about it and recognize that you're never going to be perfect, but also use it as a way to have fun with your audience, right? Connect with your audience, because the majority of the people who are out there, they probably don't even know that you made a mistake unless it's something that's like screwing up on a word or whatever. But if you can have fun with it and have a little humor and kind of make fun of yourself. I'm very irreverent and also self-deprecating. I do not take my show or myself seriously. It's sports radio. We're not talking about the war in Israel. We're not talking about life or death and the cure for cancer. It's sports radio. And I'm not saying it isn't valuable, because I know people really need it for distraction and escape. And Jess, I say this too, we agree on almost nothing in this country, but we agree on the NFL, right?
Right.
Right.
Yes.
Dogs. Oh, we also agree on dogs.
Yes.
Those are the two things. But even if you're thinking about some of the ways in which sports have this power to unify and heal, we could all think about catastrophic events, whether natural disasters or man-made catastrophes, where sports had this healing salve and quality to them. And I'm not sure I ever really understood it until a few years ago. There was a police shooting in Dallas, I believe, and it was particularly drastic. And it was a night where I was kind of shaken by what had happened and just feeling so terrible about it. And I was supposed to go to the Mets game. I think it might have been Mets Dodgers the next day. And I just didn't feel like it. I was in a bit of a malaise. What does it matter? It's stupid sports. But I had committed, and I knew that they were holding my press credential, and I had some people I was supposed to connect with. So I showed up there, and I was sitting in the press box thinking, okay, now I get it. This is exactly what people are talking about. It's okay to laugh. It's okay to enjoy a baseball game. It's okay to let go of the angst and the anxiety and all of the stresses that you're holding on to right now. It's okay to enjoy sports. Are they the solution to everything in our world? Probably not. But did they allow people a distraction and a break? So keeping all of those things in mind, the connection with people is so important. Post-pandemic, when I was sitting, not this house, but the rental house I was in a spare bedroom, talking into a corner.
Yeah.
There are no sports. People would say, stick to sports. And okay, well,
there aren't any.
Right. And so to recognize there was really a shift in my career where it became much more important for me to connect with people. And I think if you can be that companion and can you have a connection with people, regardless of what you talk about, because I can break down the NFL draft. There are former players. There's Brock Purdy, who was the last pick selected 2 years ago, who, he could talk about the draft and his experience till the cows come home. I can't offer that. There are so many people that are more qualified to speak to what's happening on the stage or what happens after the fact. But what I can do that they can't do is offer offer my perspective. And as a female, I'm a little more emotional. I'm into the redemption stories. I'm into the stories of, brothers, siblings. I mean, this is one from basketball, but Michael Porter playing for the Nuggets. One brother just got sentenced to 8 years in prison for a fatal DUI. The other one just got banned from the NBA for gambling. I mean, I'm a sister. I have two brothers. I can't even really begin to imagine what that's like for Michael. So I'm much more into the human interest stories. You don't need me for analysis. You don't need me. I mean, I'll break down a game after it happens. And that's kind of the beauty of my schedule, is going on the air right after games or events. But you don't need me for that. So I tell my students, what can people get from you that they can't get anywhere else? Well, it starts with your personality, right? Because there's only one you. There's only one you, Jess. And so there may be somebody else who can stand there with a microphone, but they're not going to be able to offer the same experience, wisdom, background, depth, personality. That's you. And so you are unique. So try to focus. I tell them, try to focus. And I tell young people I mentor, try to focus on what makes you different, not what makes you blend in.
There's no competition if you are 100% yourself. Because that's the one thing I live by, and I'm glad that you preach that, because it's so important to me as well.
Yes.
You were once told to have a backup plan.
I was.
First of all, when you were told that, what was your reaction? And secondly, did you have one after hearing that?
Well, I was in high school when that happened, and I had recently discovered this love for radio. The backstory to that is I had started applying for the Naval Academy because I love Annapolis. I had been there to visit. I was enthralled by that idea. I love structure. I'm pretty good in those types of situations where discipline is required. I love
perfectionist. Yes, of course,
right?
Yeah.
So I had started the process of applying for the Naval Academy, and I was really good in accounting, kind of that is it left side or right side? The analytical side of my brain. I've got both. And we've talked about the perfectionism. So it appealed to me that everything works out on the balance sheet at the end of the day, and I can go and I can serve my country. So I started doing that, not exactly sure how I would use it in the Navy, but figuring out, I have a plan. And I got to the point where you're supposed to get an endorsement from a congressman or a senator in your state. And then everything changed. So I was living out in the boonies in Concord, New Hampshire. We were growing up in a place where we didn't have cable. We were way out in the woods. We had a bear that lived in our front yard. So we were way out in the woods. The only way I could listen to my beloved Celtics. So I cut my teeth on late 80s, early 90s NBA. So end of Celtics, Lakers, into the bad boys, and then the Michael Jordan era. The sad saps who never saw Michael Jordan play. Oh, no.
Bless their heart.
That's when I really fell in love with the idea that I could listen on the radio and still follow my team. It was that theater of the mind. Just because I couldn't see it didn't mean I didn't know what was happening. And so I was enthralled with that idea. And I started telling everyone, I'm going to be the first female Johnny Most, who at the time was the legendary Celtics play-by-play announcer. And so that's really where my radio junkie background started. But as you point out, there weren't any women who were doing it. And so I remember telling my high school principal, I changed the Naval Academy direction. I'm going to do this instead. I don't exactly know how. So I was reaching out to people. Well, what should I do? Like, how do I get started? And my high school principal said to me, he wasn't the only one. I think the pastor of my church said the same thing. Well, women don't do that. So you better have a backup plan. I can remember it as clear as it were yesterday. And I was 17 years old. Women don't do that. You better have a backup plan. Now, I was naive. And I don't think it's a bad idea to have a backup plan. I'll tell you why here in a second. But I decided, okay, maybe they're right. They're looking out for my best interest. So I went to Messiah College and I did a double degree, one in communications and one in accounting, because I knew I could do the accounting with my eyes closed. It wasn't a huge challenge. I was okay with carrying both degrees. Played basketball, started to work at the campus radio station. And as I got through a couple of years, I realized, I'm not polished now, but I can do this. If there's one thing on this planet that I can do, it's talk, baby. Yeah. I can talk. And so it became one of these things where I was like, oh gosh, it wasn't bad advice, but it really, I think, didn't have a whole lot of foresight to it or goals and dreams. I don't think they were trying to squish me, but they were believing that really it was going to be an uphill battle and they wanted to save me that trouble. So as I progressed through, I obviously went to Syracuse and got my master's in TV and radio. And that was really the catalyst that kind of launched me forward and gave me the tools that I needed. Not everyone goes to grad school. It's not necessary for everyone, but it was for me because A, I was a female, and B, I was flying blind. I had no one to tell me how to do it until I got to Cuse. There was this incredible man. His name was Don Edwards. He's since passed away. He had worked in CNN and some of the other major news networks, both on air, but also as a producer. Right away, he said to me, you can do whatever it is that you want to do.
Oh,
We will make sure that you can do whatever it is that you want to do. You have it. You have the charisma. You have the ability to talk. You have the brain. You have the humor. We will figure out how to put those pieces together, and you can do whatever it is that you want to do. And from that point on, there was never a question. Now, I got fired twice. I got dropped from rotations multiple times. My mom came to me, I would say it was about 10 years later, my mom, who's my biggest fan. And she said, Amy, I had just been fired. How long are you going to chase this dream without anything to show for it? It sounds harsh. And my mom's blunt, and I'm okay with that. Like I'm all right with her just kind of putting it out there. She didn't mean it as, hey, you should give up. You're no good at this. What she meant was, how long are you going to be in a space where you don't have any money, where you're moving from place to place, you're chasing these kind of menial jobs or these small market jobs? All she said to me was, how much does it matter to you? How much is it worth it? Are you going to keep doing it? And I took a couple days and I thought about it and I wrestled with it. Ultimately, I came back to the place where this is what I was born to do. And I wouldn't be happy doing anything else. Now, the accounting degree was valuable because it paid the bills on the side.
Yeah.
So I did do accounting jobs and had multiple jobs until probably I was in my early 30s because I needed that steady paycheck. And radio and media is just as volatile now as it was then. So that's the element. Another thing I would say about the business that's changed is, that volatility is very much in our face now, regardless of which medium you're in. So it was those steps, those moments, getting fired, another experienced broadcaster saying to me, you haven't made it in this business until you've been fired at least twice.
Ooh, I love that.
In other words, this is part of the journey. This is only your failure if you allow it to be. If you're going to get up and you're going to keep going, something else will break for you. It's not supposed to be easy, right? If it was easy, everybody would be doing it. I know that's cliche, but also I say this too. Everything worth having is worth sacrificing for. We know that with the athletes that we cover. And for me, it was worth the sacrifices. Now, it took a lot of personal sacrifices. I've lived away from my family for decades. I only just got married 4 months ago. And I'm sure that has a lot to do with the fact that I was in a business with a lot of guys, but not the kind of business where you're searching for mates, so to speak. At least not me, right? No, it's hard. It's hard because there are men who get intimidated by what we do and strong personalities and opinions. And again, for the longest time, I tried to be one of the guys and that just didn't fit me. So it was always kind of an awkward disconnect anyway. There are a lot of sacrifices personally, but I would not change it because this is where I find joy. And often it's that joy that gives me the strength to keep going when the hours suck, because the hours do suck. In sports, they obviously don't stop on the weekends. There's no 9 to 5 banker's job. Yeah. And now here I am, year 12 of doing overnights. And it's hard. I mean, it's hard. Yeah. I think I've aged 50 years in the past 12. Don't agree with me, please. So like I said,
how dare you talk about my friend that way? How dare you?
So only you on a Friday would get to see this face. But yeah, I mean, it takes a toll, but I wouldn't trade it. I wouldn't trade it for not just for the success in the career. And honestly, radio doesn't get noticed that much anyway. I'm not even sure my boss knows what I do at night, right? Radio is kind of the gum on the bottom of media's shoe, but it's how I connect with people. And I tell young people all the time, if you're in this business for the money, I tell my producer this because the money's crappy when you start out. Yeah. You're in it for the money, for the fame, for the notoriety. If you're in it for the cushy, whatever, you think you're going to break through and be I don't know, Colin Cowherd or one of the other hosts that have made it and they can kind of do whatever they want. Jim Rome is a great example from my own network. There are very few people who get to that rarefied space. But if that's why you're in it, you're never going to be satisfied. It's never going to be enough for you. So can you do it because you love it? And for me, the early stages of my career were about the journey to figure out what my passion is and how, without pursuing this, I'll never be the person I want to be, right? This is my passion. And then as an offshoot of that, Jess, when we're passionate about something, other people will be too, even if they don't care about what we're talking about. But if you have a passion, other people will pick up on that enthusiasm and that energy. And so that's me. That's what I bring to the table. And I tell students, I tell young broadcasters, figure out what you're passionate about and chase that. Yeah.
And it makes you, it fulfills you in certain ways. And I'm glad I love that you said it's only your failure if you allow it to be. I absolutely love that.
right?
Yeah.
Same thing with athletes. A lot of the same principles apply to us, not the money, of course, but a lot of the same principles apply to us. If you give up and you go away, or if you just don't like the ancillary elements, like the long hours, the weekends, I'm sure you know dozens of people from when I started out in this business have quit and are now working at, I don't know, libraries, factories, who knows? It's not worth it for everyone. But if you keep going, there's a wisdom and an experience that you build up, and it gives you such a depth. Again, same thing as like older athletes, right? They're not the fastest, they're not the strongest, maybe they're not the most explosive, but the wisdom and the savvy and the experience that they bring to the table, not everybody has that.
And I just heard recently, like, yes, of course it's a failure if you quit. Of course you failed because you quit. It 100% means you didn't fulfill it because you quit. And it's so interesting. One thing that you said that I absolutely love when you're talking about radio, it's a theater of the mind. Mm-hmm. Where did that come from?
Well, if you take away sight and if you take away the visual element, how else can I create an experience for you when you listen to the radio? I can be the best talker on the planet, the best orator on the planet. But as I say, radio is often background noise. And because it goes on for long periods of time, people can just kind of fall into that pattern where they're not really paying attention. The number of times, and I know this because I do this. Sorry, I'm yelling. The number of times, this is what happens when I get passionate.
No, you're passionate. You're not yelling. You are passionate.
Try telling that to my husband. The first time, like our first few months, he was like, "Why are you yelling at me?" I'm not yelling. Anyway, so the first, well, this is how I know it's true. I'll get in the car at night, and I'm a news radio junkie. I still listen to news. I do not listen to sports radio. I don't want to hear someone else's opinions. I need to form my own. So I listen to the news, the weather, the traffic. I will turn on the radio for the exact purpose and the express purpose of hearing the traffic report. And then my mind will jump to something else, and the traffic report's over, and I didn't hear one thing.
Yeah.
Right? Like I have no idea. Students in class, this is why I make them engage and make them speak up, because no doubt they can stare at me and pretend like they are paying attention, but they can walk out of the classroom and not have one idea or one clue. And you know this because people will listen to what you do or they'll see what you do. Same thing with me. And what I said and what they heard and what they regurgitated, they don't match up at all.
Yeah.
Right. So the idea of theater at the mind is it's a full body experience. You immerse your listeners in something more than just a person talking. And that is pace, it's inflection, it's laughter, it's goofy crap. Like this is crazy, but we did an entire segment on it this week because I was stunned. I'd never seen Roger Goodell's middle name. Do you know his middle name is Stokey?
I did not. I didn't.
I think I was Googling his age because I wasn't sure. I thought he was early 60s.
And I know random stuff like that. I did not know.
Never heard his middle name before. Stokoe. And so we went down this rabbit hole of like, where'd that come from? Is that a family name? And so we just did something random like that. But Jess, in addition to those types of kind of random things that I stumble on, you know, my grandmother turning 100 and then passing away a few months later. My dog having to say goodbye to her after 14 years, just, a month ago, getting married, right. Getting engaged, getting married after all this time, being an old lady but no longer being old by myself. I mean, these are ways that you can give part of yourself to your audience. And again, they just can't get anywhere else. And I'm blown away. I can give you the smartest, most brilliant, snappiest sports opinion of all time. But what people care most about is that my dog's rolling in the yard and I've got a video of it, right? And so the idea is to connect with people in ways that they can relate. Don't take yourself too seriously, but also like you want to give them part of who you are. And we've just been blown away by since the pandemic, as I've tried to get kind of outside my comfort zone, a little more creative. I mean, there are times I try things and they flop completely. But what I found is that if people like you, regardless of whether or not they agree with what you're saying, and that was kind of what you were talking about before, they may think that what you say is the dumbest thing they've ever heard, or you may make a big mistake and they know it. Maybe they'll write to you and say, here's, you got this wrong or whatever, and I can quickly apologize. But they will give you a lot more leeway. They'll give you equity and credibility if they like who you are, or even if they hate who you are, but they're kind of addicted. It's an obsession, if you will. So yeah, I think the idea is to connect with people over your personality and then hopefully they can relate to you that way. You build a relationship. It sounds crazy to think, right? That you can build relationships with people who you've never met. They can walk by my house right now, would have no idea,
right?
That they even know who I am. But that's the thing, is it's this theater of the mind where you feel like you know someone, even though you don't know them at all.
And it's interesting that you brought that up, because you had a full-on Ask Amy segment dedicated to nothing but wedding stuff.
Oh, multiple ones. We couldn't believe the questions that were coming in. People are freaking nosy.
They are very nosy.
Cat, right?
Yes. And here's the thing, like, you take this, and that's cool. You take the sports element out of it, and they genuinely want to know about you.
Yeah. I mean, it's who I am in my personal life too. I'm one of those people. This is why I'm a solo host. A program director not that long ago kind of discovered, when I'm with other people, I'm a facilitator. I want everyone to be involved, right? I want you to give your opinion. I want you to tell your story. I don't want to be the center of attention. I want you all to feel like you're validated. I mean, I couldn't have expressed this like 15 years ago, but that's my personality. In school, I was the one who brought all the groups together. I felt bad about somebody who was on the outskirts. And so it's kind of my goofy little heart there, but it works on the radio because with listeners, because I want them all to feel like they're involved. It just doesn't necessarily work with a co-host, because then I kind of subvert my own opinions, and instead I'm kind of tossing them up with softball. So it's an interesting revelation, but it is my personality. I mean, I want to include people. I just love sharing. Joy's contagious, right? And to have people share my joy and excitement over finally getting married. Oh gosh, the dating stories I've told for years, and they finally could share the opposite, the rainbow, or the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, right? So it's been kind of fun. But also, you've got to maintain some professional distance because people are crazy.
Oh my gosh, I know. And I'm glad you brought up the fact that you like people to feel involved, because it got me thinking, like, when you grew up in this industry, you didn't have a lot of female role models, really any. And now you could easily be selfish and say, well, since I didn't have any, why would I give back? But that's very much the opposite of who you are. And you want there to be space for other women. So that feeling involved element to your personality, that's part of that too.
It is. And you asked me my role models, it would be my grandmothers. One lived until 91. I was very close to her more in my teenage years. She passed away the week after.
And maybe I meant it more from the career aspect.
Right. So grandmothers, strong women. My mom was a single mom for a good portion of us growing up. I had some incredible women who walked through me just in my path of faith and in church. And so those relationships are so valuable to me. I don't know what I would do without sisters, right? Like without girlfriends. Even now, and it's kind of a challenge, wasn't expecting this, when you get married, to figure out time still to talk to your mom and figure out time to talk to your girlfriends. But I mean, you and I, right? We've had to go through the whole process of like scheduling phone calls.
We did have a full-on schedule. And you okay, I'm calling in this amount of time. Are we still on? We're still on for this time. I'm yes, Amy, I know you're married, but yes, I don't want to be that person. I don't have any boyfriends, so
stop it. You have plenty going on. You have family, you have friends too. And so for years, those relationships have been so valuable to me, especially over long distances, and that I know how much they've supported and encouraged me over the course of my life, whether it's blood relative or whether it's just family by virtue of what we share. And so I just think it's so important, because it's a tough industry for anyone, male, female, yellow, green, red, purple, blue. It doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. It's a tough business. But as a female, there's fewer of us, right? And so I don't want ever to a woman to feel like she's not accepted by me, because I'm proud of the other women who've survived in this business. And I mentioned Val Ackerman, the Big East commissioner. She's done so much, first female president of the WNBA. Now she's the longtime commissioner of the Big East. She's a Hall of Famer. I mean, for me to be able to talk to her and gain wisdom from her, because she's a survivor, right? Not just a survivor, but everywhere she's gone, she's been successful. And there are certain elements about success, right? They don't apply to everyone in every space. But as women, when you connect with another female in that way, it can be such a great sisterhood. And it's carried me through so much in a business where I work with 99% males. I see because of a recent change in our lineup, there is a female co-host who comes into the studio after me now. But for the first 10 years at our network, I would go months at a time without seeing another female.
Yeah.
Right. So, and it's not exactly the same in when you're covering an athlete or covering a team, but it can be similar where you're surrounded by guys all the time. There's nothing wrong with guys, right? There's nothing wrong with guys, but I need those relationships and those connections with females because we identify, we relate, and I'm an emotional girl and I need some other emotional girls around me.
I get it. I get it. And I wanted to talk about that too. Like, me and your relationship is so important to me because it started off as work, right? You had me on your show. And the next thing you know, I'm like, oh, we relate on faith. And at the time we were both single and dating. And it was just one of those things where I'm like, oh, right. She 100% understands what I'm going through. And it's so unique from you just because you do have, like, we're all women. We all have certain similarities, but you yourself have a different view of things. So I immediately gravitated toward you, and I, you're one of my mentors and I genuinely look up to you, but more importantly, you're my friend and a good friend at that. And I feel like without more female representation, I would be, just like you said, in my own little world, like, oftentimes I'm the only woman in a clubhouse, often, but I don't think about it most times because I genuinely know I deserve to be there. And I think that's important. But there's times where I'm like, oh, right, this isn't really normal. I'm the only woman here.
Oh, it's normal, girl. It's your normal.
But I forget it sometimes, and so, but it's so good to have you in my life and in the same space as me, because it's like, we're in this together and it's a bumpy ride, but we have each other kind of on the ride together. I think it's a beautiful thing.
Isn't that the idea? Whether it's male, female, whether it's young, old, whether it's, someone in our business or someone outside, the whole idea, I think, of the human experience is that we're not alone. I mean, there's nothing new under the sun, right? It may be new to us, but we're not alone. Like, all the talk and the conversation about mental health now from athletes is so valuable because we've got young people, a quarter of our young people who are at least entertaining suicidal thoughts coming out of the pandemic. That is scary. I teach 4th and 5th graders at my church, and they will talk about anxiety. They're 9. Wow. What in the world do you have to be anxious about? But a lot of it has to do with the phone. Of course, a lot of it has to do with social media. It's not social and it's not media. I know it has its purposes and its value, but it makes me so sad that these kids are dealing with anxiety at 9 years old. And so if we can connect with people who have similar experiences, if we can know that we don't walk the road alone. I know it sounds very altruistic and Dear Laura or whatever else, but no, not Dear Laura. What's the one who, might be
Abby? Dear Abby?
Yeah. So she does a radio show. If I'll
Dr.
remember.
Laura.
Dr. Laura was the relationship one. There's another one that she still does nights. I actually worked with her in Rochester when I first started. And now she's become like global. Anyway, I remember, but she just like connects with people and gives people advice. It's that kind of a thing. I mean, I'm not as much into that, though. If people ask me, I'll certainly offer it. But to know that you're not alone and that you're not walking this path by yourself, and what you're going through, a lot of other people have experienced too. It lifts you up. It encourages you. It helps you to keep going. Right. I mean, that's forget work, forget gender, forget any of the other things that divide us. That's just who we are as humans. We need that. So I try to offer that when I can.
And I'm obsessed with it. I think it's amazing. And you talked about, like, you have the overnight hours, which is always very interesting. And I remember it was after, I think it was the wild card game, and you had me on. It's one of my favorite memories, and not just because it was an amazing experience, but then right after I'm like, oh my gosh, CBS Radio wants me to have on, like, come on. It was really cool. But, and I was like, well, I'm not going to be up that late. And you're like, no, we pre-tape some of the interviews, but you still go on. Yeah, you sometimes pre-tape the interviews, but you still go on. So when you have these hours, when I talk about you, people are like, how does she do that? So how do you do it? Just the hours themselves. And you even said, like, how do you sleep? But then you also take callers. So how does that work?
Well, yeah, it's tough. The hours are tough. It's only the passion, right? I come back to that over and over. I can be dog tired. This week I had appointments during the daytime. I didn't get to sleep. Plus I'm driving up and back to Syracuse. So I'm gone for a couple of days each week. Yeah. And so it's a lot. The spring is always a lot anyway. But I tell people, once I get into the studio and I turn that microphone on, a lot of that goes away because I love what I do. Now, last night's a great example of when I was just beat. The NFL draft is 4 hours. There's NBA, there's NHL. It's the end of a long week. And I was wiped out. And so I don't want to say it's fake, because it's not fake, but the energy it's a little bit like the fake it till you make it. Oh, yeah. Until you feel it kind of a thing. It's a tough schedule. I'm generally a night owl. I'm not a morning person.
Okay.
I stink at morning. So the nights fit me a little better. And also I do love, at some point, I want to change, but I do love going on right after the events happened. And so it's kind of cool to be that first voice, or one of the first voices people hear. So that's kind of me. I mean, that's my excitement, my love for sports, what I want to deliver, that theater of the mind. But yeah, it's off the air at 6 a.m. Eastern time. It's then, the commute out of New York City, which is not opposite traffic. There's no opposite traffic. There's just traffic.
Yeah.
And it's getting home. And now with a husband, right? He's just waking up. He's got his coffee in hand and he's just staring at me over the top of his mug. And I'm like, woo, until my energy runs out, which it does, kind of boom, right into a brick wall. And so I try to read a little bit of fiction, just kind of settle my brain down.
I get that. Yeah.
7:45, 8 o'clock Eastern, I'm generally in bed. If in a perfect world, I would sleep until 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but that doesn't happen more than maybe once a week. So it's that I tell people I sleep when there are no sports as much as possible. I sleep when there are no sports. But I flip my schedule every weekend because I don't want to be sleeping all day, Saturday and Sunday. I can't do that really. And so and now being married and we're being in opposite schedules, it's challenging. And like I told you, I feel like I've aged so much over the past 12 years. So I am looking for a change, a little scoop there, a little intel, looking for something different soon. It's scary to think about leaving a very steady gig. And 3 or 4 times since I joined this network, I've had opportunities to change time slots. And for the career, for the lifestyle, I had a dog at home, wanted to make sure that I didn't have to worry about her. I mean, the commute as well. I've chosen to stay where I am. I do love nights, but we change as people, we change as personalities. My focus is different on the radio. So I am looking for something different, maybe a different day part or a different kind of focus of the radio show. We'll see. My contract is up at the end of the year. And I honestly, at this point, have no idea what's going to happen.
Yeah, I get it. It's always kind of interesting. I think that's cool. It's okay to embrace the fact that you change and you have these new elements in your life and they're adding to your life. And you get to shift around those as opposed to the opposite, which I think is really cool.
Well, and thank God there are no tapes of me when I'm first starting out in this business, because that's the kind of stuff that I would not want anyone else to hear. I mean, I cringe to think about my first ever shows.
You know what? I read somewhere recently, if you're not cringing on something or someone that you used to be, you're not growing.
Oh, I like that. Okay. Yeah. We change as people.
And I'm the queen of cringe. I tell you, I am a cringy person. I do a lot of cringy stuff. I said dome piece earlier and it's ruminating in my head. And I feel like the weirdest person ever.
You want to hear something funny about cringy? The moment that Caitlin Clark was introduced by the Indiana Fever, and I know the reporter who did the symbol, right? I know him. It came out horribly wrong. He's not that kind of a guy. He's not cringy. Greg is he's very smart. He's very astute. He just got carried away and didn't really know what to say. He kind of backed up into that moment. But anyway, I didn't think it was like he was trying to harm her or was being sexist. It was kind of one of those inherent things that you don't realize how badly it comes across. I bring that up in my class and all of a sudden all 11 students start talking all at once. I mean, that was something they could identify with. It was pretty interesting their reaction about how cringy that was, because it's an older dude, right? I don't know exactly how old he is, but 50, maybe something like that. And it's Caitlin Clark, and she has handled everything that's thrown at her. She's the biggest star in sports right now. And he has this weird, awkward moment. And my students couldn't get over it, right? Like that's a teaching moment. So yes, cringy does work in terms of that space where you can teach people.
We should make a t-shirt. Cringy does work.
Cringy works. It's a good education school.
I know. I feel like, and I'm right there with you, because there's times where I'm like, did I really ask that? And you know what? There's times it does work because I get a really interesting answer out of an interview question.
The power of digital editing.
Yes, exactly. Amy, you've been amazing. Thank you so much for your time.
It's so good to see your face, of course, even though I didn't really want to be on video. But
I know. Yeah, I so appreciate you doing that. It means the world to me.
Just this is the kind of thing I'm talking about, right? The connections, the support, the encouragement, knowing that we're not alone. And I mean, I'm so thankful for you and so proud of you, Jess. You're crushing it.
Thank you so much. You're the best. That was Amy Lawrence. We covered so many different elements to the space, to this atmosphere, to this industry, and she kind of made me feel better about the fact that, you know, I'm still single. I don't have any kids. And she waited a while to get married. And we don't need to lie about the fact that this career is very unique, especially for the women involved. And so it's okay to wait to get married. I think that's just an honest advice that I can give somebody. Just wait a little bit, like it's chill, but especially in this space where men tend to get intimidated. That's a whole different episode, which I would love to get into. But I'm not in a rush to do all of that because of just the scheduling and how this whole market is when it comes to women. And she did it. She actually got married and she's very, very happy. And I'm very happy for her. Thank you to everyone tuning into this episode. Once again, like I said, these are extra fun because when you have my good friends joining, I always get a little bit more excited. Thanks for following everything on the Comeback and Awful Announcing. Like and subscribe to this podcast where you can get all of your podcasts, and then subscribe to us on YouTube. Just search Awful Announcing and you can listen to all of and watch. Maybe I'm a background noise person. I don't know. It's fine either way. Wouldn't you want to see this face all the time? For Philip, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Want even more short and to the point? Follow Jessica at Kleinschmidt JD and head over to thecomeback.com and awfulannouncing.com.